My name is Robert, and I want to tell you a story that revealed the true faces of the people I loved most. This happened in Chicago, where I worked as a senior mechanic at a factory, while my wife Valerie was a successful real estate agent. We got married 7 years ago, and I always considered myself lucky. Valerie was beautiful, ambitious, earned more than me but never put me down because of it. At least that's what I thought. Our mutual friend Kyle was an architect. We met him back in college. He helped us buy our house, found a great lot with a discount. We were very grateful to him. Kyle often came for dinners, helped me with repairs, was always there during difficult times. Last spring, everything started to change. But the changes were so subtle that I didn't notice them immediately. Valerie began working late, often went on business meetings on weekends. But the strangest thing was that she started giving me advice about my career. "Robert, you're talented. Why don't you start your own business?" she would say, counting money for business development. "Kyle says he knows investors." I was touched by her support. We started planning my auto repair shop. Kyle really found investors, helped with paperwork. I was over the moon with happiness. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been in development for months. I later learned that Valerie and Kyle had been meeting secretly since February. Not just for romantic encounters but for business planning sessions. They studied my work schedule, my habits, my financial situation. They knew exactly when I received my salary, how much I had in savings, what properties were in my name. Kyle, being an architect, had access to information about promising land plots around Chicago. He knew which areas would rise in value, which permits were being approved. Together with Valerie's real estate connections, they had insider information that regular people like me could never access. The auto repair shop idea wasn't spontaneous either. They had researched the market, identified the most profitable locations, calculated potential income. They knew that such a business could bring in 6 figures annually if managed properly. But here's what made their plan particularly cruel. They genuinely believed I was too stupid to manage such a business successfully. In their minds, I was just a simple mechanic who could fix cars but couldn't handle finances or strategic planning. I remember one evening in May when Kyle was over for dinner. Valerie was in the kitchen and he was showing me some architectural drawings. "You know, Robert," he said, "starting a business is complex. There are licenses, permits, tax implications. Maybe it would be easier if someone with experience handled the business side while you focused on what you do best, fixing cars." I nodded enthusiastically. "That makes sense. I just want to work on cars, not deal with paperwork." He smiled, but I now realize it was the smile of a predator who had just convinced his prey to walk into a trap. In June, the planning intensified. We had weekly meetings at our house where Kyle would bring documents, Valerie would review financial projections, and I would mostly listen and sign whatever they put in front of me. "This is so exciting," Valerie would say, kissing my cheek. "Our future is going to be so bright." During these meetings, I noticed small things that didn't quite add up, but I dismissed them. Kyle always seemed to know exactly where we kept our financial documents. Valerie would sometimes finish his sentences when he was explaining business concepts to me. They had an understanding between them that went beyond casual friendship. But I was so focused on the dream of owning my own business that I ignored all the warning signs. The July incident was when I should have realized something was wrong. I came home early from work with a stomach bug and found Valerie on the phone in our bedroom, speaking in hushed tones. "No, we can't move that fast," she was saying. "He needs to feel like it's his idea." "Yes, I understand the timeline, but we have to be careful." When she saw me, she quickly hung up and claimed it was a work call about a difficult client. "You look terrible," she said, feeling my forehead. "Go rest, I'll make you some soup." That night, she was unusually attentive, bringing me medicine, checking on me every hour. At the time, I thought she was being a caring wife. Now I realize she was making sure I hadn't overheard too much. In August, when the business plan was almost ready, I needed to go to Detroit for a specialized equipment exhibition. Valerie insisted I should go for 3 days instead of 1. "You'll find better prices," she said. I was excited about the trip. It felt like a real step toward becoming a business owner. I spent hours at the exhibition taking notes, collecting brochures, talking to vendors. I even called Valerie several times to share my excitement about the equipment I was seeing. "That's wonderful, honey," she would say. "Take your time, make sure you see everything." What I didn't know was that while I was in Detroit, truly believing I was building our future, Valerie and Kyle were at our house, going through all my personal documents, photographing bank statements, and planning their next moves. Returning early due to weather, I decided to stop by Valerie's office with flowers, to thank her for her support. The secretary seemed surprised. But Mrs. Johnson isn't working today. She took vacation this whole week. My heart started beating faster. I called Valerie. She answered after the fifth ring, her voice breathless. Robert, you're back already? I'm at the gym. Which one? I'll pick you up. No, I'll come home myself. Give me an hour. I drove home and waited. She appeared 2 hours later, fresh as if she had just showered, but somehow nervous. The next day I went to the gym where she supposedly was. They didn't know her there. I started to understand that something was wrong. But instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to investigate more carefully. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. A week later, I hired a private detective. Not because I wanted to harm her, but because I couldn't live with uncertainty anymore. The photographs I received a month later were devastating. Valerie and Kyle at a restaurant, kissing by his car, entering a motel together. But the worst photograph was the last one. Both of them in the real estate office, leaning over documents and laughing. I didn't understand immediately. Going home, I carefully reread all the papers for our future business. And then everything fell into place. The land plot for the auto repair shop was registered under Kyle's name. The equipment loan was also in his name. Even the company name was registered to him. I was supposed to become just an employee in my own business. But the most vile thing was something else. Looking through bank statements, I discovered that Valerie had been gradually transferring our joint money to accounts I had no access to. Even my life insurance had been changed. She was now the beneficiary instead of my mother. They were planning to get rid of me. Maybe not physically, but to make me end up with nothing while they got everything. The detective's report revealed even more disturbing details. Valerie and Kyle had been meeting regularly at a private club downtown, where they would discuss their plans with other people, lawyers, accountants, business consultants. They had built an entire network of professionals who were helping them execute their scheme. Kyle had used his architectural firm's resources to research zoning laws and future development plans for the area where our auto shop would be located. He knew that the city was planning to build a major shopping center nearby, which would increase property values by 300% within 2 years. Valerie had been using her real estate connections to identify other properties that I owned or had rights to. She had even researched my family's assets, including my parents' house and my brother's business interests. They weren't just stealing from me, they were positioning themselves to profit from long-term real estate investments using my money and my identity. The most chilling discovery was a recorded conversation the detective captured during one of their meetings. They were discussing exit strategies, what to do with me once they had secured all the assets. We could arrange for him to have an accident at the shop, Kyle suggested. Industrial accidents happen all the time in auto repair. Too risky, Valerie replied. Better to just drive him to bankruptcy and depression. Make him disappear voluntarily. Hearing this recording made my blood run cold. These people, whom I had loved and trusted, were casually discussing ways to destroy my life or even end it. I realized they were playing a long game, and they had been planning this for much longer than I initially thought. The detective found evidence that their affair had started almost 2 years ago, around the same time Valerie began suggesting I should start my own business. But they didn't know one thing. I had a trump card. A year ago, my older brother asked me to become a co-owner of his business in California, officially for tax benefits. I agreed without thinking about it seriously. The company was involved in IT consulting and was worth considerable money. This business relationship meant I had access to legal and financial resources they didn't know about. My brother's company had partnerships with law firms, accounting agencies, and private security companies. I started to act. First, I visited a lawyer and quietly transferred all my property to an offshore company connected to my brother's business. Our house, cars, even furniture, everything stopped belonging to me personally. Then I hired another detective to collect evidence of Valerie's financial fraud. It turned out she had violated several laws by transferring my money without permission. But I also did something else that would prove crucial later. I started secretly recording all our conversations, all our meetings with Kyle, every discussion about the business. Illinois is a one-party consent state, so these recordings would be admissible in court. And then I started my own game. I began acting as if I suspected something else entirely. I questioned Valerie about strange phone calls, about suspicious cars near the house. She thought I was jealous of other men. "Robert, you're going crazy," she would scream. "I'm working for our family." Kyle also joined the game, started calming me down, saying Valerie loved me. They even staged several accidental encounters where they demonstrated that there was nothing between them. Meanwhile, I continued playing the role of a trusting fool who was preparing to open his auto repair shop. I signed documents they gave me, joyfully discussed plans. During this period, I also started building my own network. Through my brother's connections, I found investigators who specialized in financial crimes. I hired a forensic accountant who could trace every dollar that had been moved from our accounts. I discovered that the conspiracy was even larger than I initially thought. Kyle had convinced several other couples to invest in similar schemes. We weren't his only victims. They had been running this operation for at least 3 years. The forensic accountant found evidence of at least 12 other cases where Kyle and Valerie had used the same pattern. Identify a trusting spouse, convince them to start a business, steal their assets, and then disappear. Some of their previous victims had been completely ruined. One man had lost his house, his savings, and his family business. Another had been so devastated that he had attempted suicide. This information made me realize that I wasn't just dealing with an affair and some financial theft. I was dealing with professional criminals who had perfected their system over years of practice. In November, Valerie announced she was going to a conference in Las Vegas. Kyle coincidentally mentioned he would be there on business too. "Great," I said. "You can fly together." They both flinched but agreed. While they were in Vegas, I put my plan into final action. I moved all valuable items to my brother's place, closed joint accounts, turned out I still had access rights to some, and most importantly filed a complaint with the police about financial fraud. But I also did something they would never expect. I contacted all their previous victims and convinced them to come forward with their own complaints. Suddenly, instead of one isolated case, the police were looking at a pattern of organized fraud spanning several years. When Valerie returned, a surprise was waiting for her. I was sitting in the living room with documents. "Hi, darling. How was your time with Kyle?" She initially denied everything, but when I showed the detectives photos, she broke down. "Robert, I can explain everything." "No need. I understand everything. I understand why you transferred our money. I understand why the auto repair shop is registered to Kyle. I understand why you changed the insurance." Her face went pale. "The only thing you don't know," I continued, "is that for the last 3 months, all our property hasn't belonged to me. And that tomorrow the police will receive evidence of your financial fraud, along with evidence from all your other victims." The next few hours were chaotic. Valerie screamed, begged, threatened. Kyle came over and also tried to explain everything. "We didn't want to deceive you," he said. "We just what? Just decided I was too stupid to notice?" The best part was that they couldn't take anything from the house. Technically, everything belonged to my brother's company, and they had no rights to this property. Valerie had to move in with Kyle with one suitcase of clothes. But the story was far from over. What happened next exceeded my wildest expectations for justice. The police investigation revealed the full scope of their operation. They had stolen over $2 million from various victims over 3 years. They had been living a luxury lifestyle funded entirely by other people's money. Kyle's architectural firm was revealed to be a front operation. Most of his successful projects were actually funded by stolen money. His reputation in the industry was completely fabricated. Valerie's success as a real estate agent was also largely fake. She had been using inside information obtained through fraud to make profitable deals, then taking credit for her business acumen. When the story broke in local media, it became a sensation. "Architect and real estate agent run $1 million romance scam," was the headline in the Chicago Tribune. Both of them were arrested. Kyle was charged with fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. Valerie faced similar charges, plus identity theft and forgery. During the trial, more details emerged about their operation. They had been targeting middle-class men who worked in blue-collar jobs, believing these men would be easier to manipulate and less likely to understand complex financial schemes. They had profiles on each of their targets, including psychological assessments. My profile described me as trusting, hardworking, financially naive, and likely to defer to authority figures in business matters. Reading that profile in court was humiliating, but it also made me angry. They had studied me like a lab rat, identified my weaknesses, and exploited them systematically. The trial lasted 6 months. During this time, I testified about my experiences, as did 11 other victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Kyle was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Valerie received 8 years with the possibility of parole after 5. But the criminal justice was only part of their punishment. The civil lawsuits were devastating. Between restitution to victims, legal fees, and punitive damages, They lost everything they had stolen and more. Kyle's architectural license was permanently revoked. Valerie was barred from working in real estate anywhere in Illinois. Their assets were seized and sold to compensate victims. The house they had bought with stolen money, the luxury cars, the jewelry, everything was liquidated. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their downfall was how completely their social world rejected them. The professional networks they had built, the friends they had cultivated, the social status they had enjoyed, all of it evaporated overnight. Kyle's former business partners publicly distanced themselves from him. Valerie's colleagues in real estate spoke to reporters about how they had always suspected something was wrong. Their families were also devastated. Kyle's parents had to sell their house to help pay for his legal defense. Valerie's sister, who had always looked up to her success, cut off all contact. As for me, I genuinely moved to California and became a co-owner in my brother's IT company. It turned out I had a talent for business, just not the kind Valerie had planned for me. My brother's company specialized in cybersecurity, and my mechanical skills translated surprisingly well to understanding how systems work and how they can be protected or exploited. Within a year, I was managing a team of security consultants. Within 2 years, I had opened a West Coast branch of the company. The irony was perfect. While Valerie and Kyle were sitting in prison, I was building the successful business they had tried to steal from me. But the story doesn't end there. About 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Valerie. She was writing from prison, and the letter was full of apologies and explanations. She claimed that Kyle had manipulated her, that she had never intended for things to go so far, that she had genuinely loved me and regretted everything. She also mentioned that Kyle had blamed everything on her during his testimony, trying to reduce his own sentence by claiming she had been the mastermind of the operation. "The truth is, Robert," she wrote, "we were both greedy and stupid. We thought we were so clever, but we destroyed our lives and hurt so many innocent people. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what we did was unforgivable." I never replied to that letter, or to the dozen others she sent over the following months. 6 months ago, I heard that Valerie had been released on parole after serving 5 years. Kyle still has 4 more years to go. A private investigator I still keep in contact with told me that Valerie is now working at a call center in a small town outside Chicago. She lives in a studio apartment and takes public transportation to work. She had tried to reconnect with her family, but her parents and siblings want nothing to do with her. The real estate industry blacklisted her completely, and her criminal record makes it impossible to get any job involving financial responsibility. Kyle's situation is even worse. His parents disowned him after they lost their house. His ex-fiancée, who had broken up with him when the scandal broke, married someone else and moved to another state. When he's released, he'll have no professional prospects, no family support, and no savings. He'll be starting over at age 40 with a felony record and no legitimate skills. Meanwhile, my life has exceeded every expectation I had when I was dreaming of that auto repair shop. The cybersecurity company now has offices in 3 states. I've spoken at industry conferences, been featured in business magazines, and have been recognized as a rising entrepreneur in the tech sector. I bought a house in San Francisco that's worth more than everything Valerie and Kyle stole from all their victims combined. I drive a Tesla that cost more than Kyle's annual salary when he was a successful architect. More importantly, I found someone new. Her name is Sarah, she's a software engineer, and she's everything Valerie pretended to be but never was. Genuinely intelligent, honestly successful, and completely trustworthy. Sarah knows the whole story of what happened with Valerie and Kyle. She was initially concerned that I might have trust issues, but she's been patient and understanding as I've learned to trust again. We've been together for 2 years now, and last month I proposed. She said yes, and we're planning a wedding for next spring. Sometimes I think about alternate timelines. What if I had never discovered their scheme? What if they had succeeded in stealing everything and disappearing? I probably would have ended up broke, possibly homeless, maybe even dead if Kyle had decided to implement his more extreme exit strategies. Instead, their betrayal became the catalyst for the best period of my life. They forced me to become stronger, smarter, and more independent than I ever would have been otherwise. The divorce was finalized while Valerie was in prison. She didn't contest anything, there was nothing left to fight over anyway. I kept one thing from our marriage, a photo of the 3 of us from happier times. Not because I miss those days, but as a reminder of how completely wrong you can be about the people closest to you. In that photo, we're all smiling at a barbecue in our backyard. Valerie has her arm around my waist, Kyle is holding a beer and laughing at something I said. We look like the perfect trio of friends. But now I can see what I missed at the time. The way Valerie's smile doesn't reach her eyes, the calculating look Kyle gives me when he thinks I'm not watching, the subtle body language that suggests they're sharing secrets I don't know about. It's a masterclass in deception, preserved in a single snapshot. I keep it in my office as a reminder to trust my instincts and never ignore red flags, no matter how much I want to believe in someone. The last I heard about them was 6 months ago. A mutual acquaintance told me that some of their fellow inmates had discovered what they were in prison for, and they weren't popular among the other prisoners. Apparently, criminals have their own code of ethics, and stealing from trusting spouses is considered particularly low, even by prison standards. Kyle had been attacked twice and spent most of his sentence in protective custody. Valerie had been harassed by other female inmates who saw her as a traitor to marriage and family values. Prison, it seems, was providing its own form of justice beyond what the courts had ordered. As I write this story, I'm sitting in my office in San Francisco, looking out at the Golden Gate Bridge. In a few hours, Sarah and I are going to dinner to celebrate the 2nd anniversary of our first date. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with investors who want to fund an expansion of our cybersecurity company into the European market. Next month, I'm giving a keynote speech at a national conference about protecting small businesses from financial fraud, partly based on my own experiences as a victim. My life now is everything I dreamed it could be when I was that naive mechanic in Chicago, planning an auto repair shop that would never belong to me. The difference is that now I built this success myself, with full knowledge and control, surrounded by people I can actually trust. Valerie and Kyle taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that the greatest betrayals often come from the people who claim to love you most, but that surviving such betrayal can reveal strengths you never knew you had. They thought they were taking advantage of a simple, trusting man who would never fight back. Instead, they created their own worst enemy, someone who understood exactly how they operated and had the resources to stop them. In the end, their greatest skill, manipulating people's trust, became their greatest weakness. They were so confident in their ability to deceive that they never considered the possibility that their victim might be smarter than they assumed. Justice, it turns out, has a beautiful sense of irony. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.